Hey Piedmont Doctorate family, I am here to present our literature map number 2 assignment. For this assignment, I chose to use the article titled Measuring Math Anxiety Through Self-Reported and Physiological Data. I want to start by saying the reason I chose this topic or this article is because it goes along with my topic for my dissertation, which relates to measuring math growth opposed to math achievement and seeing how that relates inside the classroom. So, for this literature map, I chose to use a more hierarchical um, webbing of ideas that was presented in Creswell's and Gutterman's book. And so I start with the main problem and then I kind of go down into the main question that is asked in the introduction and then just breaks down the points from there. So the main problem presented in this article is on the idea of math anxiety. The problem is that math anxiety can hamper the development of one's mathematic proficiency. Measuring math anxiety has been found to be difficult to distinguish when distinguishing between trait math anxiety and state math anxiety. Math anxiety is typically measured using self-reports, but there's a new way of measuring called physiological data, but there's very little research behind this. And the authors of this article really want to look at the pros and cons of using physiological data versus um, self-reports. And so the question is, does using physiological data more accurately measure and equip more profound understandings of math anxiety? And so then it goes in further to define math anxiety and how math anxiety can be measured. So the definition of math anxiety, according to one of the citations within the article from Richard and Suman, defines math anxiety as feelings of tensions and anxiety that interfere with the manipulation of numbers and the solving mathematical problems in a wide variety of ordinary life and academic situations. And so what the authors of this article have found is that math anxiety can be split into two different categories. It can be split into trait math anxiety and state math anxiety. And so here I broke down those two definitions so that we can see the difference between the two. Trait math anxiety, according to the author, is a personal or a person's tendency to be anxious when confronted with mathematics. So basically, somebody who just hears the word math and they get really anxious about it, they don't like it. Typically, most of my students. And then we have what's called state math anxiety, and this is more of a fluctuating feeling of anxiety in response to a specific mathematical situation. Most of the times, this can be when the problems start to be increasingly more difficult, or if there's a particular content. I know for my students, it's fractions. They're all fine and dandy, but then when we hit fractions, they all freak out on us. And so those are the two different ones that the authors look at in this article. All right, so back it up there. There we go. Okay, so the author first starts talking about trait math anxiety and how trait math anxiety is usually measured using through self-reports. And the use of self-reports is the primary way to measure the trait version of math anxiety. To do that, self-reports are questionnaires given to the participants that investigate the prevalence of their math anxiety, the development of their math anxiety, and the relationship between math anxiety and math achievement. And this is typically done at the conclusion of a math lesson or just detached from a math lesson. So it's really just sitting there asking, how do you feel about math? There has been recent research studies that tried to use self-reports for state math anxiety, and the author tells us here that the attempts were made to measure state MA using questions like, on a scale of 1 to 10, how anxious are you? Though they do found that when they did this, there are several disadvantages to this method, and some of those disadvantages are laid out right here for us. The state of math anxiety is not a single occurrence, whereas trait math anxiety is. Trait math anxiety just kind of exist, whereas the state is all based on the situation of the math lesson. So because of this, the state MA can fluctuate. It can take place either before the lesson, during the lesson, or after the particular math lesson. And in order to do the self-report, you would have to stop the participant throughout the study by asking them guiding questions and asking them reflection questions, which then obstructs the learner and the learning process, which can even further increase the anxiety, which is never what we want to be able to do. We never want to hinder or hurt the participants in the study. The author even pointed out that the use of self-reports is not always found to be age-appropriate, and that it can be difficult for those with disabilities. Sometimes, depending on age and ability level, it's difficult to articulate feelings, and so this form of measurement is not always extremely accurate. It also states that it's contingent on trustworthiness because it is a reflection type measurement, and it could skew the accuracy of the results. So moving on to measuring it with physiological data. I put a quote here because I thought it just stated it very well, that the physiological data has effective factors during learning are typically associated with physiological arousal. Analyzing these physiological reactions to measure math anxiety can be considered as an attempt that meets the limitations of self-reports, because these responses can be mapped in a more continuous, unobstructive, and objective manner. So basically what the author was saying is that by using this data, it's going to be more accurate because it's more continuous, and it's unobstructive, and it's more objective, and they can measure it throughout the entire lesson. Studies on anxiety and stress will indicate increase in Galvanic skin response, increased heart rate, decreased heart rate variability, and decreased skin temperature. This can all be measured while using a wearable device that tracks and monitors these variables, which is what the authors ended up doing here, the researchers. Instead, they measured on a more scientific basis instead of a reflective basis. And they monitored these variables here because we all know when we get anxious, we kind of get clammy skin, our heart rate races, and things like that. And so they're more able to monitor these things, these variables during the math lessons. They also says by using this method, the researcher would be able to monitor the participants as the mathematical content or task increases in difficulty without interrupting the learner or the learning process. That goes back to not hindering or hurting the participant. That they could just, once again, use one of those wearable devices that monitors all those variables. And as the things increase, and as the suspected anxiety would increase, they would be able to monitor that through the physiological happenings of the body. The author also pointed out that research shows that this would allow for more accurate data, and it would be uninjectable. So after the literature review, the author states their purpose of study. And so after dissecting the difference between trait and state and between self-reported data and physiological data, the author proposed that this purpose of the study. And it says the aim of the study is therefore to tackle these research gaps by using a 2x2 experimental design, manipulating both task difficulty, easy versus difficult, and topic, math versus non-math. This leads to 4 task conditions for which were measured self-reported state anxiety, perceived difficulty, and various physiological responses. And so basically the author or the researchers, they took this purpose statement and they conducted basically 4 different studies. They measured using self-reported data on for state math anxiety by measuring the difficulty of tasks and by measuring things that were math topics versus non-math topics. Then they did the same thing for physiological data. I found this to be very helpful and useful because it shows me that there is proof out there that math anxiety does hinder the performance of math achievement, and that this could be one of those areas that I need to focus on when I'm trying to work with students and increasing their mathematic growth and trying to decrease their math anxiety. Here is the reference for the article, and I also attached the article itself right there with that link.